The polished steel door hissed open, a sound he usually associated with success, with finality. But tonight it was a prelude to silence, an unnatural, heavy silence that clung to the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. He called her name, the sound swallowed by the cavernous living room overlooking the city's glittering heart. He found her in the nursery, curled on the floor beside the unassembled crib, her body trembling with sobs that seemed to tear from her very soul. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, and in that moment, seeing her broken, he knew their perfect life was a lie. The elevator ascended the 52 floors in a whisper of polished chrome and silent mechanics. A vertical journey he made a dozen times a day. It was his seamless transition from one world to another, from the concrete canyons where he wrestled financial beasts to the sterile tranquility of his skyborn sanctuary. He was a man who had built an empire from the rubble of a broken childhood, a titan of industry whose name was etched onto skyscrapers and whispered in boardrooms. He craved order, predictability. The gentle ding of the elevator arriving at his private floor was usually the sound of his world settling into its perfect, hard-won equilibrium. Tonight, however, a discordant note hummed beneath the surface. The deal had been a monster, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that had consumed him for the better part of 3 months. It had been grueling, a marathon of sleepless nights, transatlantic flights, and enough caffeine to power a small city. But they had won. He had won. The victor's spoils were waiting, a glass of 18-year-old single malt and the soft embrace of his wife. The heavy door, keyed only to his thumbprint and hers, swung inward without a sound. "I'm home," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous foyer. The space was an ode to minimalist wealth, a single dramatic sculpture twisted toward the 30-foot ceiling, its shadow dancing on walls of imported Italian marble. There were no family photos, no clutter, no signs of life beyond the faint, clean scent of ozone from the air filtration system. It was a home designed to impress, a fortress built to keep the chaos of the world at bay. Usually she would be there to greet him, a warm, living counterpoint to the apartment's cold perfection. She would emerge from the kitchen, her face dusted with flour, or from her art studio, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek, and the entire sterile expanse would suddenly feel like a home. Her laughter was the only color that truly mattered in this monochromatic world he had built. But tonight there was only silence, a profound, unnerving quiet that seemed to absorb the sound of his own breathing. He loosened his tie, his gaze sweeping the living area. The skyline of the city glittered beyond the panoramic windows, a sprawling galaxy of artificial light that he, in part, owned. Yet the view offered no comfort. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach, a primal instinct he'd learned to trust on the trading floor. Something was wrong. He walked through the archway leading to the residential wing, his expensive leather shoes making soft, apologetic sounds on the marble. Her studio door was ajar, but the room was dark. The kitchen was pristine, untouched. He moved faster now, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He pictured her, imagined her tripping, falling. The baby, their baby, the one thing in his life that felt truly pure, truly his. He found her in the nursery. The room was painted a soft, gender-neutral yellow, a concession to her desire for a surprise. It was the one room in the penthouse that felt entirely hers, filled with hand-painted watercolors of whimsical animals and a bookshelf groaning with classic children's stories. A custom-made crib, a ridiculously expensive piece of sculpted oak, lay in pieces on the plush rug, its assembly instructions discarded nearby. And beside it, curled into a tight ball, was his wife. Her back was to him, her shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. The sight was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. In the 4 years they had been married, he had seen her cry only twice. Once during a tragically sad movie, and again on the day they learned she was pregnant. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was different. This was the sound of a heartbreaking, a desolate, gut-wrenching grief that had no place in their carefully constructed world. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her back, afraid that his touch might shatter her completely. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "What is it? What's wrong? She flinched at his voice, pulling herself tighter. A small, wounded sound escaped her lips. He could see the tracks of her tears glistening on her cheeks in the dim light filtering in from the hallway. Her beautiful face, the face he saw in his dreams, was swollen and blotchy with sorrow. Talk to me, he pleaded, his own control beginning to fray. He was a man of action, a fixer of problems. He could negotiate hostile takeovers and crush competitors, but this raw, unfiltered pain left him feeling utterly helpless. He reached out again, this time resting his hand gently on her shoulder. Her skin was cold. Is it the baby? Is the baby okay? She shook her head, a violent, jerky motion. The baby's fine, she choked out, her voice so hoarse it was almost unrecognizable. Relief warred with confusion. If not the baby, then what? What could possibly have happened in the 12 hours since he'd left for the office that could reduce his vibrant, resilient wife to this shattered heap on the nursery floor? He looked around the room, searching for a clue, a reason. His eyes landed on her phone, lying screened down on the rug a few feet away. A small, dark corner of his mind, the part that had clawed its way to the top, whispered a question he didn't want to ask. He had given her everything, a life of unimaginable luxury, security, his unwavering devotion. What could possibly bring her this much pain? As he knelt there, the silence of the penthouse pressing in, he felt the first terrifying crack appear in the foundation of his perfect life. He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms as if she were made of delicate glass. She felt fragile, her movements stiff and uncoordinated. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on the floor, on the scattered pieces of the unassembled crib, as if they represented the unassembled fragments of their life at that moment. He led her from the nursery, the soft yellow walls suddenly feeling mocking and cheerful, and guided her to the living room. He sat her down on the sprawling white sofa, a piece of furniture that cost more than the house he'd grown up in. He then went to the bar, his movements automatic, and poured a glass of water, his hand shaking so slightly that only he would notice. The single malt he'd been craving now seemed obscene. He brought the water to her, pressing the cold glass into her trembling hands. Drink, he said softly. It was a command, but tempered with a gentleness he reserved only for her. She took a small, shuddering sip, the condensation from the glass dripping onto her simple maternity dress. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside their glass tower, time had seemed to stop. He sat on the ottoman opposite her, leaning forward, trying to read her face, but she had become a stranger to him in the space of an hour. The open, expressive woman he loved had been replaced by this shuttered, guarded figure. Tell me what happened, he urged, keeping his voice level, fighting the tide of panic rising in his chest. Did someone call? Did you get bad news? He thought of her parents, aging but healthy, who lived a quiet life in the countryside, funded by his generosity. Is it your mother? Your father? She shook her head, a listless, barely perceptible movement. No, they're fine. Her voice was a monotone, devoid of its usual warmth. Then what is it? The question came out sharper than he intended, a sliver of his boardroom impatience cutting through his concern. He immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, he said, softening his tone. I'm just worried. I've never seen you like this. A tear escaped and traced a slow path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. I'm just tired, she whispered, the words so faint he had to strain to hear them. It's the hormones, I guess. Overwhelmed. I was trying to build the crib and I just couldn't do it. It was the most pathetic lie he had ever heard. This was not a woman frustrated by flat-pack furniture. This was a woman hollowed out by grief. His mind raced, cataloging possibilities. Financial trouble? Impossible. A health scare she was hiding? Unlikely. He had access to the best doctors in the world. A fight with a friend? She didn't have many close friends. Their life was insulated, private, just the way he liked it. The dark whisper from the nursery returned, louder this time. Her phone. He saw it, still lying on the nursery floor in his mind's eye. An affair. The thought was a venomous serpent, coiling in his gut. It was a cliché, the bored, beautiful wife of a wealthy, work-obsessed man seeking comfort elsewhere. But it didn't fit. She wasn't like that. Their connection was real, deep. He had staked his entire emotional life on that certainty. He loved her with a desperate, possessive intensity that bordered on worship. She was the one good thing that had ever happened to him, the anchor that kept him from drifting into the cold, empty space of his own ambition. The idea that she could betray that, it was unthinkable. It would be the end of him. He pushed the thought away, disgusted with himself for even considering it. He was letting his exhaustion and fear get the better of him. He had to trust her. "Okay," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "Okay, you're overwhelmed. I get it. I've been absent. This deal took everything. I'm sorry." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was limp and cold in his grasp. "I'm back now. It's over. I'm all yours. We'll build the crib together this weekend. We'll do whatever you want." He was offering an olive branch, a return to normalcy. He expected her to squeeze his hand, to offer a small watery smile, to let him in. Instead, she slowly pulled her hand away, tucking it into her lap as if his touch had burned her. The rejection was a quiet, devastating blow. "I think I'm just going to go to bed," she said, her voice still flat and distant. She rose from the sofa, her movements slow and deliberate, the swell of her belly a prominent silhouette against the city lights. She didn't look at him as she walked away, her posture rigid, her shoulders slumped. He watched her go, a chasm opening between them with every step she took. The porcelain mask of her composure was firmly in place, but he had seen the cracks. He had seen the raw, primal agony beneath it. And her lie, her flimsy, insulting lie, was more terrifying than any truth she could have told him, because it meant she was hiding something. Something she believed was so terrible, so catastrophic, that she couldn't share it with him. He sat there for a long time, the silence of the apartment pressing down on him. The city lights blurred through the window, the triumphant glitter of his success now feeling like a mockery. He had built this gilded cage for them, a fortress of wealth to protect them from the harsh realities of the world. But he was beginning to realize that the real danger wasn't outside the walls. It was already inside, sitting in the dark, and he had no idea what it was. His gaze drifted back toward the nursery, and the image of her phone face down on the rug burned in his mind. Sleep did not come. He lay beside her in the king-sized bed, a vast, empty expanse separating their bodies. He could hear her breathing, a shallow, unsteady rhythm that was a world away from her usual deep and peaceful slumber. Every time she shifted, every time a small sigh escaped her lips, the tension in his own body ratcheted tighter. He was a man accustomed to control, to having data, to understanding the variables in any equation. Her sorrow was a variable he couldn't quantify, an unknown that was tearing his ordered world apart. His mind, a relentless engine of analysis and strategy, refused to rest. It replayed the scene in the nursery over and over, dissecting every detail, the force of her sobs, the way she flinched from his touch, the hollowness in her eyes, and the lie, the insultingly simple lie. "It's the hormones." She had never patronized him before. Their relationship had been built on a foundation of mutual respect and brutal honesty. He had told her about his past, the dirt-poor, violent upbringing he had fought so hard to escape. He'd shown her the scars, both literal and figurative, and she had traced them with a tenderness that had healed parts of him he didn't know were broken. In return, she had been his open book, until now. He slipped out of bed, the motion fluid and silent. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor as he padded back into the living area. The apartment felt different at this hour, less like a home and more like a museum after closing time. Cold, silent, and filled with expensive ghosts. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sleeping city. He felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a boy, hiding in a closet while his parents destroyed each other and everything around them. That was where his obsession with control came from. He had vowed to never again be a victim of chaos, to build walls so high and thick that nothing could ever hurt him. He'd built them around his heart, too. She was the only one he had ever let inside. He found himself walking towards the nursery, drawn by an invisible thread of dread. The door was slightly ajar, just as he'd left it. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the room in a pale, ethereal glow. The whimsical animals on the walls seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. His gaze fell immediately to the spot where her phone had been. It was gone. Of course, she must have retrieved it when she'd gone to the bathroom before bed. He scanned the room again, his eyes sharp, searching for, he didn't know what, a misplaced object, a note, anything out of the ordinary. His attention settled on the changing table. Alongside the neatly stacked diapers and jars of cream was her handbag, a stylish leather tote he'd bought her in Paris. It was unzipped. She was usually meticulous about her things. A war raged within him. His rational mind screamed at him to stop, to go back to bed, to trust his wife and talk to her in the morning, to not become the suspicious, paranoid man he despised. But the other part of him, the street kid who had survived by trusting his gut, was screaming louder. It was telling him that the answer, the source of her pain, was within reach. His heart hammered against his ribs as he reached into the bag. His fingers brushed against her wallet, a set of keys, a tube of lipstick. And then they closed around a small rectangular piece of cardstock. He pulled it out. It was a business card. The material was thick, expensive, the lettering embossed in a simple, elegant font. It was for a law firm, a high-end, notoriously discreet firm that specialized in one thing: family law, divorce, custody battles. He stared at the card, the name of the senior partner seeming to burn into his retinas. Why would she have this? The question exploded in his mind, shattering his last vestiges of denial. There was no innocent explanation. You don't consult a divorce lawyer because you're having a bad day. He sank down onto the small rocking chair in the corner, the business card trembling in his hand. The serpent of doubt he had tried to suppress now uncoiled with a vengeance, sinking its fangs deep into his heart. An affair. It had to be. She had found someone else. She was planning to leave him, to take his child. The thought was a physical agony, a white-hot poker twisting in his gut. He thought of all the late nights, the missed dinners, the trips he'd taken without her. Had he pushed her away? Had his obsession with building their perfect future blinded him to the crumbling of their present? He remembered a conversation from a few weeks ago. He'd been on the phone, pacing, barking orders at a subordinate. She had been watching him, a strange, sad expression on her face. When he'd hung up, she'd asked him, "Do you ever think about just stopping? Selling everything and moving to that little cottage by the sea we talked about?" He had laughed. "And do what? Go bankrupt in a year? Don't be silly. I do this for us. For our son. Or daughter," she had corrected him softly, a faint smile on her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. He hadn't seen the sadness then, but he saw it now. He had dismissed her dream as childish fantasy, too busy architecting their gilded cage to notice she felt trapped inside it. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt the cold sweat of panic on his brow. The empire he had built suddenly meant nothing. The money, the power, the prestige. It was all just a pile of ashes. She was the foundation of his world, and that foundation was crumbling into dust. His past came rushing back. The raw, visceral memory of his own father packing a bag, his mother's shattered sobs echoing in the tiny, squalid apartment. He was becoming his father, the work-obsessed husband whose wife sought solace in another's arms. The cycle he had sworn to break was repeating itself. He sat there in the moonlight, in the room meant for their future, holding the proof of his failure. The silence of the apartment was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of unspoken words, of her quiet unhappiness, of his own willful blindness. And for the first time in his adult life, the man who had an answer for everything had no idea what to do. The next morning was a masterclass in avoidance. She moved around the kitchen with a brittle, almost frantic energy, making coffee, slicing fruit, her movements sharp and precise. The porcelain mask was firmly back in place, her face a carefully blank slate. She offered him a smile that was a perfect, beautiful lie. It didn't reach her eyes. Those lovely, expressive eyes were dull, their depths shadowed by the storm he knew was raging behind them. He played his part too. He talked about the market, about a minor issue with a subsidiary in Tokyo, about the weather. The conversation was a fragile bridge of meaningless words built over a chasm of unspoken truths. He watched her, looking for a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the broken woman from the night before. But she was gone, replaced by this eerily calm automaton. The business card felt like a lead weight in his pocket. Every time he moved, he could feel its sharp corners, a constant, nagging reminder of his discovery. He wanted to throw it on the table, to demand an explanation, to shatter the fragile piece with the force of his fear and anger. But he couldn't. He was terrified of the answer. If he confronted her and she confirmed his fears, his world would end, right there over breakfast. So he said nothing. He drank his coffee, the bitter liquid scalding his throat, and retreated behind his own mask of calm professionalism. It was a stalemate of silence, a cold war waged across a marble kitchen island. When he left for the office, she walked him to the door, a ritual they had performed every morning of their marriage. She rose on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. Her lips were cold. "Have a good day," she said, her voice perfectly even. "You too," he replied, the words feeling like a betrayal. In the elevator, he pulled out the business card again. Matheson, Hayes, and Finch, family law specialists. He took out his phone and, with a sense of profound self-loathing, typed the firm's name into the search engine. Their website was as sleek and intimidating as the card. They boasted of their discretion, their tenacity, their success in high-net-worth divorces. Reading the testimonials from satisfied clients felt like reading the obituaries of failed marriages. His entire day was a charade. He sat in meetings, his mind a million miles away. He stared at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring into meaningless patterns. His team, accustomed to his laser focus and decisive commands, exchanged worried glances as he issued vague, non-committal responses. The titan of industry was a ghost at his own throne. He couldn't shake the image of her, broken on the nursery floor. Even if she was leaving him, even if she had betrayed him, that level of grief didn't make sense. There was more to the story. There had to be. He needed proof. He needed to know. The not knowing was a poison, seeping into every corner of his mind. And so, he did something he had sworn he would never do. He called his head of security, a former Mossad agent named Ben, who could find out anything about anyone. "I have a personal matter," he said, his voice low. "It requires absolute discretion." "Of course," Ben replied, his tone unwavering. There was no judgment, no surprise. He was a tool, and a ruthlessly efficient one. He gave Ben the name of the law firm and the partner on the card. Then, with a knot of sickness in his stomach, he asked him to run a quiet check on his wife's communications. Phone records, emails, credit card statements. "I need to know everything, Ben. Everything." "It will be done," Ben said, and the line went dead. The rest of the afternoon was torture. Every ping of his phone made him jump. He paced his office like a caged animal, the stunning view of the city he commanded now feeling like a prison. He was betraying her trust, invading her privacy, becoming the very person he never wanted to be. But the fear was stronger than his principles. The fear of losing her, of losing his child, was an all-consuming fire. At 4 o'clock, an encrypted email arrived from Ben. It contained a single, password-protected file. His hands trembled as he typed in the code. The file opened, and a list of documents appeared. Phone records, bank statements, emails. He clicked on the phone records first. He scanned the list of numbers, his heart pounding. There were no secrets there. Calls to her parents, her obstetrician, a few friends, nothing out of the ordinary. No long, late-night calls to a mystery number. A flicker of hope ignited within him. Next, the credit card statements. He scrolled through the transactions. Flowers for her mother, books from an online store, maternity clothes, a large purchase from a high-end baby boutique. Then he saw it, a recurring monthly charge, a significant one, $1,500 every month for the past 6 months. The recipient was a nondescript holding company he didn't recognize. He made a note to have Ben trace it. Finally, the emails. Ben had only been able to retrieve metadata in a few fragmented chains from a deleted items folder she must have forgotten to clear. Most of it was junk mail, newsletters, online shopping confirmations. He was about to close the file. a wave of relief and guilt washing over him when he saw a subject line that made his blood run cold. It was from an address he didn't recognize. The subject, the arrangement. He clicked on it. The body of the email was short, just a few lines. The next transfer is scheduled for the 15th. As agreed, no further contact is necessary unless there is an emergency. Please confirm receipt. It was dated 2 days ago. He checked the sender's address. It was a jumble of letters and numbers from a Proton mail account. Untraceable. He looked at the date of the first payment on the credit card statement. It was just a few days after she had told him she was pregnant. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under his weight. His mind reeled, trying to piece it together. A secret, untraceable email address, a recurring, clandestine payment, the business card for a divorce lawyer. It all pointed to one unavoidable conclusion, but it still didn't add up. Why the elaborate secrecy? Why the payments? If she were having an affair, why would she be paying someone? He felt like he was losing his mind. He was chasing a ghost, a digital breadcrumb trail that led only to more questions. He looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was time to go home. Time to face the stranger who shared his bed. He now knew he couldn't confront her with this. Not yet. He had fragments, suspicions, but not the whole truth. And he had a terrifying premonition that the whole truth was something far more complex and far more devastating than a simple affair. The drive home was surreal. The familiar streets and landmarks of his city seemed alien, as if he were seeing them through a distorted lens. The man who had left his home that morning was not the same man returning. The morning version had been a husband, worried and confused. This version was an investigator, a prosecutor, armed with fragments of evidence that painted a damning, yet incomplete picture. The weight of the encrypted file felt heavier than any corporate portfolio he had ever managed. He let himself into the apartment, the silence greeting him like an old, unwelcome friend. He found her in the kitchen, not cooking, but staring out the window, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She turned as he entered, and for a fleeting second he saw it again. The raw vulnerability from the night before, a flicker of fear in her eyes before the mask slammed back down. "You're home early," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Finished up," he lied, placing his briefcase on the counter. "How was your day?" "Quiet. I read for a while." She gestured to a book lying on the island. The title was, "What to Expect When You're Expecting." The irony was a physical blow. He couldn't do it. He couldn't play this game anymore. The charade was choking him, poisoning the very air between them. He had to know the truth, no matter how much it destroyed him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. The forced cheerfulness vanished from her face, replaced by a guarded, wary expression. "Okay," she said slowly, her hand tightening on her stomach. "About what?" He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I know you're unhappy, and I know it's more than just hormones." He watched her face for a reaction, but she remained unnervingly still. "Last night I found this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the business card, placing it on the marble island between them. It lay there, a small white rectangle of impending doom. He saw her eyes flicker towards it, and a tremor went through her body. He saw her swallow hard. "Why do you have a card for a divorce lawyer?" he asked, his voice shaking, despite his efforts to keep it steady. "Are you planning on leaving me?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard. He could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren from the street below, the frantic beating of his own heart. She stared at the card, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. They were filled with a swirling vortex of emotions he couldn't decipher. Fear, yes, but also a profound sadness and something that looked like pity. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "I'm not leaving you." "Then what is this?" he pressed, his voice rising. "What are the secret payments for? Who are you sending $1,500 to every month? What is the arrangement?" Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks until she was as white as the marble countertop. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked trapped, terrified. "I hired an investigator," he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I had to know. I thought you were having an affair." A single harsh, broken sound escaped her lips. It might have been a laugh or a sob. An affair, she choked out, her voice cracking. You think this is about an affair? She pushed herself away from the counter and staggered back, her eyes wide with a wild, desperate pain. God, if only it were that simple. And then, the dam broke. The carefully constructed walls of her composure didn't just crack, they exploded. The grief she had been suppressing erupted with the force of a tidal wave. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, her body convulsing with sobs that were terrifying in their intensity. He rushed to her side, his anger and suspicion evaporating, replaced by the same overwhelming fear he'd felt in the nursery. He tried to hold her, but she pushed him away. Don't, she screamed, her voice raw with agony. Don't touch me. He recoiled as if struck. He knelt a few feet away, helpless, as her anguish filled the room. It's not what you think, she gasped between sobs, her words fragmented and broken. The money, the lawyer, it's not for me. Then who? He pleaded, his mind struggling to process her words. Who is it for? She looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and despair. And in her eyes he saw a truth so devastating it would rewrite his entire world. It's for my sister, she whispered. The words hung in the air, nonsensical. He stared at her, utterly bewildered. Your sister? You don't have a sister. You're an only child. He knew her family. He'd met her parents dozens of times. He'd seen the photo albums from her childhood. There was no sister. I do, she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. I have a twin sister. No one knows. My parents. They gave her up for adoption when we were born. His mind went blank. He couldn't make sense of it. A twin sister, a secret she had kept from him for their entire relationship. It felt impossible, like a plot from a melodramatic novel. They were young, she continued, the story pouring out of her now, a torrent of long-buried secrets. Terrified. They could only afford to keep one of us, so they kept me, and they gave her away. They made a choice, and they made me promise to never, ever tell anyone. It was the family's great shame. He could only stare, speechless. The foundation of his reality was cracking beneath him. The woman he thought he knew better than himself was a stranger. I found her 6 months ago, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I hired a private investigator. I had to know if she was okay, and I found her. She paused, another wave of sobs shaking her. And she is not okay. She's the opposite of okay. She took a ragged breath, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the walls of their penthouse. Her life. It's been hard. The family that adopted her, the father was abusive. She ran away when she was 16. She has a son. He's 7 years old. And her husband, the man she's with now, he's just like the man who raised her. He hurts her. He hurts the boy. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The family lawyer wasn't for their divorce. It was for hers. The secret monthly payments weren't for a lover. They were a lifeline. She's trying to leave him, she said, her voice thick with tears and a fierce, protective love. The money is for a safe house, for food, for her son. The lawyer is helping her build a custody case. She's been documenting the abuse, trying to get enough evidence to take her son and disappear somewhere he can never find them. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a betrayer, but a protector. He saw a woman torn apart by a terrible secret, trying to save a sister she barely knew. The other half of herself who had been dealt a cruel and different fate. The depth of her pain, her grief, it wasn't for herself, it was for her twin. The night before last, she whispered, her eyes locking with his. He found out. He found the lawyer's number. He beat her so badly she ended up in the hospital. He threatened to kill her if she ever tried to leave again. He told her he would take her son and she would never see him again. That's why I was crying. I thought he had killed her. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The cold, sterile perfection of their apartment, of their life, seemed to shatter into a million pieces. The suspense of the past 48 hours hadn't been about the potential death of their marriage. It had been about the potential death of a woman he had never known existed. And his wife, his beautiful, brave wife, had been carrying this impossible burden all alone, honoring a promise made before she could even speak, to protect a family secret that was destroying her from the inside out. He had accused her of betrayal while she was in the midst of a desperate secret rescue mission. The shock of it left him breathless. The confession hung in the air between them, shimmering with the weight of decades of silence. The sleek, modern kitchen, a testament to his success and control, now felt like a sterile, inappropriate stage for such a raw and primal revelation. He stared at his wife, this woman who was both intimately familiar and a complete stranger, and felt a profound seismic shift in his understanding of her, of them, of everything. The anger and suspicion he had harbored for the last 2 days had vanished, replaced by a tidal wave of shame so powerful it threatened to drown him. He had been so wrapped up in his own fear, his own wounded pride, that he had been completely blind to her suffering. While he was agonizing over the possibility of a broken heart, she was living in terror of a broken body, not her own, but that of her mirror image, a sister living a nightmare. He slid across the cold marble floor and gathered her into his arms. This time she didn't resist. She collapsed against him, her body boneless with exhaustion and relief, and wept. Not the violent, agonizing sobs of before, but a deep, sorrowful weeping that spoke of years of carried secrets and lonely fear. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, murmuring apologies over and over again. The words inadequate, but all he had. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "God, I am so sorry. For not seeing it. For thinking. For what I accused you of." She just clung to him, her fingers digging into the fabric of his expensive suit jacket. They stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the floor of their perfect kitchen, two broken people surrounded by the wreckage of a lie they hadn't even known they were living. Slowly, her crying subsided into shuddering breaths. He helped her up and led her to the sofa, the same sofa where she had pulled her hand from his just 24 hours earlier. The distance that had felt like a continent then was now gone, bridged by the terrible, liberating truth. He sat beside her, keeping a supportive arm around her shoulders as she began to speak, the full story tumbling out in a rush of whispered, painful words. She told him her sister's name. It felt strange on her lips, a name she had only ever written in secret emails or spoken to a lawyer. She described the few furtive meetings they'd had in discreet coffee shops, the shock of looking at a face so like her own, yet so different, hardened by a life he could barely imagine, the eyes carrying a weariness that belied her age. She was the other side of the coin, the result of a single 50-50 decision made by two scared teenagers. While his wife had grown up with piano lessons, private schools, and unconditional love, her sister had grown up in a world of uncertainty and fear. "I look at her," she said, her voice trembling, "and I feel this overwhelming guilt. Why me? Why did I get this life and she got that one? It's not fair." He held her closer, feeling the weight of her misplaced guilt. "It wasn't your choice," he said softly. "None of it was." She told him about her nephew, a small, quiet boy with his mother's eyes. She had only seen photos of him, but she loved him with a fierce, desperate ache. He was the reason for all of this. Her sister would endure the beatings, but she would not let her son grow up thinking that violence was a form of love, that fear was the price of family. As she spoke, he began to understand the true depth of her isolation. She had been navigating this emotional minefield completely on her own, bound by a childhood promise to her parents, a promise that protected their reputation at the cost of her own peace and nearly at the cost of her sister's life. He felt a surge of cold fury towards her parents, whose cowardice had set these tragic events in motion 3 decades ago. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the question not an accusation, but a plea. "I could have helped. We are a team." She finally looked at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Telling you meant breaking the most sacred promise I ever made. It meant unearthing a secret my parents believe would ruin them. And I was afraid you would see me differently, that you would look at me and see this damaged family, this complicated past." She gestured vaguely at their pristine surroundings. "Our life is so perfect, so clean. I didn't want to bring this darkness into it." His heart broke for her. She had been trying to protect him, to protect their gilded cage, from a reality she felt was too ugly for it. He saw now that his obsession with perfection, with order, had inadvertently made her feel like she couldn't show him her messy, complicated human parts. There is no us without that darkness, he said, his voice firm with a conviction that settled deep in his bones. Your darkness is my darkness. Your family is my family. He stood up and began to pace, the nervous energy that had plagued him for days now channeling itself into a new, clear purpose. The fixer, the problem solver, was back, but his objective had changed. This wasn't about a corporate takeover. It was about a human rescue. Where is she now, he asked, his tone shifting, becoming the decisive commander his employees knew so well. Is she safe? She's at a friend's house, or she replied, watching him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. But he knows where the friend lives. She can't stay there for long. And the boy? He's with her. She managed to get him out. Okay. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his mind already formulating a plan, running through logistics, calculating risks. The helplessness he had felt for the past 2 days was gone, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. Okay, this is what we're going to do. In that moment, the power and resources he had amassed, which had felt so meaningless just hours before, suddenly had a purpose. His wealth, his connections, his ruthless efficiency, they weren't just tools for acquiring more wealth. They were tools for salvation. He looked at his wife, her face stained with tears, but her eyes shining with a fragile, nascent hope, and he knew their life would never be the same. The perfect, sterile world he had built was gone forever, and in its place something real, something messy, and something far more meaningful was about to be built. The next 12 hours were a blur of calculated action. The penthouse, once a silent monument to their quiet life, transformed into a tactical command center. The man who had ruthlessly orchestrated corporate acquisitions now applied that same ferocious intensity to a far more important merger: the joining of two fractured families. His first call was to Ben, his head of security. There was no preamble, no evasion. Change of plans, he said, his voice a low, urgent hum. Forget the surveillance. We have a new priority: an extraction. He laid out the situation in cold, hard facts. A woman and a 7-year-old child in danger, a violent husband, a need for absolute discretion and speed. Ben, to his credit, didn't ask a single personal question. He simply processed the data and began outlining a strategy. He spoke of safe houses that weren't just apartments, but fortified, untraceable locations. He talked about transport, about legal shields, about creating a digital black hole around the sister and her son, so that the husband, no matter how hard he looked, would find nothing but dead ends. While he handled the logistics, she was on the phone with her sister. Her voice was a low, steady murmur of reassurance, a stark contrast to her earlier hysteria. For the first time, she was not just a secret benefactor, but an active participant, a lifeline. She was giving her sister something more valuable than money: a concrete plan, a pathway to freedom. Hope. He watched her, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. This was the woman he had fallen in love with, strong, compassionate, and utterly fearless when it came to protecting those she loved. The most difficult call was to the family lawyer whose card had started it all. He made the call himself, with his wife sitting beside him, her hand gripping his. He introduced himself, the weight of his name instantly changing the lawyer's tone from professionally courteous to deferential. My wife has briefed me on her sister's situation, he said, cutting straight to the point. The passive, document, and wait approach is over. We are moving to active intervention. I am authorizing you to use the full extent of my resources. I want the best child custody experts, the most aggressive litigators. I want a restraining order so airtight that he can't come within 500 yards of them without triggering an alarm on every police officer's phone in the state. Spare no expense. He was declaring war. He was taking all the power, all the influence he had accumulated, and focusing it like a laser on one man who hurt women and children. It was the purest, most righteous purpose he had ever felt. As dawn approached, casting a soft gray light over the city, the immediate plan was in place. A discreet security team, handpicked by Ben, was already en route to the friend's house. A private jet was being fueled at a suburban airport, ready to take the sister and her son to a secure location in another state. A beautiful house on a quiet lake where they could heal while the legal battle raged. With the logistics handled, an exhausted quiet settled over the apartment. They sat together on the sofa, watching the sunrise paint the sky. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of gravity. They had crossed a point of no return. Their lives were now inextricably linked with a woman and a child they barely knew. Their future, once a predictable trajectory of wealth and comfort, was now a wild, unknown territory. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice soft in the quiet room. This, this will change everything. It will be messy. It could even be dangerous." He turned to look at her. The morning light caught the exhaustion on her face, but also a newfound strength in her eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said, and he meant it. "My whole life, I've been running from the kind of chaos your sister is in. I built all of this," he gestured to the opulent room, "to keep it out. But I was wrong. You don't fight chaos by building walls. You fight it by facing it head on, by protecting the people you love." He took her hand. "He is a monster of the same breed that created me. The difference is, I have the power to stop him. If I don't use it, then what's the point of any of this?" A single tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of gratitude, of overwhelming love. There was one last piece of business, one final secret to confront. "Your parents," he said gently, "they need to know. You can't carry this for them anymore." She flinched, the instinctive fear of a lifetime of obedience still present. "They'll never understand. They'll be horrified." "Maybe," he conceded, "or maybe they'll finally have a chance to atone for a mistake that has haunted 3 lives for 30 years. Either way, the truth has to come out. The secret is what's been poisoning everyone." He saw the struggle in her eyes, the war between her duty as a daughter and her new, fierce loyalty to her sister. He saw the moment she made her choice. It wasn't a choice between 2 family members. It was a choice for truth over silence, for courage over fear. "You're right," she said, her voice firm. "I'll call them after she's safe." This was their new beginning, forged in the crucible of a crisis. They were no longer just a wealthy couple living in a penthouse. They were a team, a family unit expanding to include the broken and the lost. They were choosing to step out of their gilded cage and into the messy, complicated, and beautiful reality of the world. The life they were building now would not be perfect, but it would be real. And it would be built not on a foundation of wealth, but on a foundation of love, sacrifice, and a shared, unwavering purpose. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. 2 days later, they stood in the arrivals hall of a small, private airfield 1,000 miles from home. The air was clean and crisp, smelling of pine and open water. It was a world away from the concrete and ambition of the city. He stood slightly behind his wife, his hand resting on the small of her back, a silent, steadying presence. She was vibrating with a nervous energy, her eyes fixed on the door that led to the tarmac. The door opened and a woman walked through. For a moment, his breath caught in his throat. It was like looking at a distorted reflection of his wife. She had the same eyes, the same bone structure, the same curve of her lips. But her face was thinner, her skin had a sallow tint of exhaustion, and there was a map of hardship etched into the lines around her eyes. A fresh, ugly bruise colored her left cheekbone, a stark reminder of the reality they had just pulled her from. She moved with a skittish, hesitant gait, as if expecting a blow at any moment. Clinging to her hand was a small, pale boy with enormous, haunted eyes that seemed too big for his face. He stared at the floor, his shoulders hunched, trying to make himself as small as possible. His wife took a tentative step forward. "It's me," she whispered. The sister looked up, and her eyes, so like his wife's, filled with a mixture of disbelief, relief, and a lifetime of unspoken questions. She let go of her son's hand and rushed forward, and the 2 women, 2 halves of a whole, collided in a fierce, desperate embrace. They wept in each other's arms, 30 years of separation and silence, melting away in a torrent of shared tears. It was a reunion and a mourning all at once. Mourning for the childhood they never had, the sisterhood they were robbed of. He watched them, his own eyes burning. He felt like an intruder on a moment so sacred, so profoundly intimate. He looked at the little boy, who stood frozen, watching his mother with a look of profound confusion and fear. He knelt, slowly, so as not to startle him. "Hi there," he said softly. "I'm your uncle." The boy just stared, his eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't know what an uncle was, not really. The men in his life had not been kind. This man was different. He didn't loom. He spoke quietly. He had kind eyes. The reunion at the airfield was the beginning of a long, difficult road. The new house by the lake was not a magical cure. The sister was plagued by nightmares. The boy, her nephew, didn't speak a word for the first 3 weeks. He was a ghost in the house, flinching at loud noises and sudden movements. The trauma they had endured was a deep, festering wound that would take years to heal. But they were safe, and they were not alone. His wife stayed with them for the first month, a constant, loving presence. She and her sister spent hours just talking, piecing together the disparate fragments of their lives, forging a bond that was both brand new and ancient. He flew out every weekend, leaving his empire in the capable hands of his subordinates. He brought groceries and toys. He spent his time not in boardrooms, but sitting on the floor, patiently building elaborate Lego castles, hoping to coax a word, a smile, from his silent nephew. The legal battle was brutal, just as he had anticipated. The husband was a cornered, vicious animal. He fought dirty, leveling false accusations, trying to paint the sister as an unfit mother. But he was no match for the legal army his money had assembled. And more importantly, he was no match for the truth. The call to their parents was the hardest part. His wife made it from the house by the lake with her sister holding her hand. The reaction was exactly what she had predicted. Shock, denial, then shame, and horrified regret. There were tears and recriminations. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect family had been shattered forever. The healing there, if it ever came, would be a fragile and uncertain thing. But the truth was out. The secret had lost its power. 3 months later, he and his wife were back in the nursery in their penthouse. This time, they were building the crib together. He tightened a final screw and stood back, admiring their handiwork. It was solid, sturdy, ready. His wife came and stood beside him, her belly now a proud, full globe. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "She called today," she said quietly. "Oh yeah, how are they?" "Good, really good." A smile touched her lips. "He spoke to me, on the phone. He told me he loves his new room, and he asked when he could see his cousin." He felt a lump form in his throat. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her and their unborn child close. The gilded cage had been broken open. Their world was no longer pristine or predictable. It was messy, complicated, and filled with broken people. But it was also filled with hope, with healing, and with a fierce, unconditional love that was stronger than any wall he could ever build. Their family wasn't just the three of them anymore. It was five. A strange, fractured, and beautiful family, forged in a crucible of secrets and lies, and saved by a single courageous choice. The city lights glittered outside, but for the first time, he wasn't looking at his empire. He was looking at his world, and it was finally, truly whole. So, what would you have done? If you came home to find the love of your life in pieces, and every clue pointed to the ultimate betrayal, would you have hired an investigator? Would you have risked destroying everything to find the truth? Or would you have trusted even in the face of damning evidence? Let me know in the comments below.